All right, I'll call the roll. Ana Gonzalez, Martha Armas Kelly,
Present.
Amber Novi, Cheryl Villegas Walker,
Here.
William Walker.
President.
Oh, we have quorum for this meeting.
Great. Thanks, Justin.
And then I can jump into the logistics.
Perfect.
All right. Welcome, everyone, to the August 6th, 2024 Interagency Transportation Equity Advisory Subcommittee meeting on safety and climate. This committee's focus will be on elevating diverse and historically marginalized voices and will advise the California Transportation Commission, California State Transportation Agency, and California Department of Transportation on how to achieve meaningful outcomes in transportation equity, environmental justice, and equitable economic opportunities, especially as related to transportation planning and programming. The meeting agenda is located on the Commission's website at www.catc.ca.gov. Any document created for this can be translated into any language you need. Simply email us at transportationeac@dot.ca.gov, and we will have them returned to you as quickly as possible. American Sign Language interpretation is being provided for this meeting. You should see them on your screen. Spanish translation is also being provided. You can access this service through the Interpretation tab, likely located at the bottom of your screen. Please use the Q&A tab if you have any questions about this. Live closed captioning is also available. Please select the Show Captions tab at the bottom of your screen. There are a number of language options available there to choose from. Presenters, if you're on the agenda to make a presentation, do your best to be succinct. Remember to speak at a steady pace to allow our translating services adequate time for accurate translations. And if you're presenting remotely, we hope that you will turn on your camera during your presentation if you have one. Members of the public, we welcome comments from the public as a part of each item at this meeting. For those attending via Zoom, you should see the webinar control panel, likely located on the bottom of your screen. There you'll find the raise hand and Q&A tabs. We encourage you to use the hand raise feature as soon as we reach the item to give the system time to acknowledge you. Committee staff will let you know when it is your turn to make your comment. Alternately, you may use the Q&A tab to submit your comment. Committee staff will read the comment on your behalf. As a reminder, each registered attendee is provided a unique link and phone number to access the webinar. These should not be shared with other participants, as this can create confusion for staff when making comments. Do your best to be concise. Remember to speak at a steady pace to allow translating services adequate time for accurate translations. Make sure that your comments add new information. If you agree with the comments of a previous speaker, simply make that statement. We ask you make your point in 3 minutes or less. If for some reason we have many speakers on any single topic, we reserve the right to limit comments to 1 minute if needed. Thank you all for joining us today.
Wonderful. Thank you, Justin, and thanks to all the committee members, subcommittee members who've joined us today and taken out some time in your afternoon to kick off today's Safety and Climate Subcommittee. My name is Sequoia, and I serve on the planning team at the California Transportation Commission, and I am part of the interagency coordination team for the Equity Advisory Committee. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and today I am wearing a stripy scarf, black sweater, and I am a woman with brown curly hair and glasses. So for tab 2, for our tribal acknowledgement, as our interagency staff are located in the Sacramento region, we utilize the California Native American Legislative Caucus land acknowledgement, which is, we acknowledge the ancestral homelands of the Nisenan, Southern Maidu, Valley and Plains Miwok, Patwin Wintun, and Wilton Rancheria peoples of the land on which we work on today. Even further, we recognize that all Native American peoples have a deep connection to the land and have made significant contributions to the broader community throughout California, our states, and the world. Since we are meeting virtually today and our subcommittee members are calling in from around the state, members are welcome to make tribal acknowledgements specific to their areas.
I'm William Walker, and I'm on unceded Ohlone land in the San Francisco Bay Area.
I'm Martha Armis Kelly, and I'm the Equity Advisory Committee Vice Chair. I am right now in Jamestown, California, out in the foothills in the Yokuts and Miwoks land. And today I am participating right on the rancheria, the Chicken Ranch Rancheria in Central California. And I'm very grateful for my ancestors as well as those that have preceded before their ancestors in recognition of the spaces and the territories that we are all in California. So thank you for allowing me this space to be here. I am a Latina, indigenous woman wearing my hair pulled back into a bun, brunette, flowered blouse, black pants, and I am very, very much eager and engaged, smiling and excited about being in this space.
Thank you. Seeing no other members come off mute, I'll move on. Justin, is there any public comment on this item?
I'm not seeing any requests to comment at this time.
Great, thank you. Okay, so moving on to tab 3 for public comment on non-agenda items. So this item is for folks to make comments, folks in the audience or attending virtually, to make comments on items that aren't on today's agenda. Justin, is there anyone online wishing to make public comment on items not on the agenda?
Given attendees a few more moments, a reminder that you may use the virtual hand raise feature or submit a written comment. And Sequoia, I'm not seeing any requests at this time.
Okay, thank you, Justin. And just a reminder for anyone tuning in, you are also welcome to make comments on all of the items on today's agenda when we reach those tabs. So with that, I will go ahead and pass it back to Carolyn. Thank you.
Wonderful, thanks, Sequoia. Good afternoon, folks. I'm Carolyn Abrams, and I'm a Senior Advisor on Race and Equity in the Caltrans Director's Office of Equity and Tribal Affairs. I use she, they pronouns, and I'm a white woman with short brown hair, wearing glasses, and a white collared shirt. So I want to really quickly, before we dive into this discussion, Justin, do you mind if I share screen? I'm going to pull up a couple slides.
Yes, I did assign you as co-host, so you mind checking to make sure you have now the authority to share screen?
All right, let's give it a try.
All right.
How does that look? Can everyone see my screen? Fantastic. All right, so really quickly, for everyone's benefit, we already ran through the first couple agenda items on here, including roll call, tribal acknowledgement, and public comment on non-agenda items. So that brings us to tab 4, which is the discussion and brainstorm around topics and areas of interest for this ad hoc subcommittee focused on safety and climate. And following this discussion, this will be the main piece for today, but following this discussion, we will also talk about the subcommittee's meeting schedule and also possibly take action if the subcommittee is prepared to do so around electing an ad hoc subcommittee chair. And then we can wrap at the end, and we should be done here on the hour. So that being said, some of you heard this yesterday if you joined our other subcommittee meetings. So I appreciate your patience as we walk through this again, but I want to make sure that everyone has this information just to set the tone, set the stage for what this subcommittee is trying to accomplish. So as a reminder, there's a difference between ad hoc subcommittees and permanent subcommittees. This one, back at the April meeting, was created as an ad hoc subcommittee, which means that it is temporary. It has a clear goal and a timeline for which it will accomplish that work. And generally speaking, what's written in the charter is this subcommittee would sunset either after that goal is achieved or in about 1 year's time. And I want to reassure folks that there's a lot of flexibility with this. So as an ad hoc subcommittee, that 1 year of time could come and go, and you could determine that your work is not yet done. So you could reestablish this ad hoc subcommittee. You could also amend the charter to make this a permanent subcommittee if you think that that's appropriate or needed for the work of the EAC. Or you could branch off and identify subject matter experts to work on specific topic areas as a result of the work of this subcommittee. So plenty of options, but the way that we're operating right now is that this is an ad hoc subcommittee, and you all are allowed within this group to consult with other stakeholders, community members, policy experts, etc., to inform the work of this subcommittee. And you'll be responsible for reporting out at each of the larger committee meetings. So when we convene with the full EAC, someone would be tasked with providing a report out on the work of this subcommittee. And this subcommittee is also in a position to propose recommendations to be adopted by the entire committee. So if you are taking on a task or an initiative or some type of project area, and you want to put forward recommendations to our agencies, you would first bring those recommendations to the full committee to be adopted as a formal recommendation of the EAC. And then finally, the last piece is that any recommendations that are adopted by the full EAC would be given to staff to direct to the appropriate agencies. So that's just some of the context and the process in which we're operating. But I also want to reiterate some of the criteria for the scope of work for this subcommittee. And most importantly, anything that this subcommittee takes on needs to fall within the larger committee scope. So that's the starting place. And then ideally, the focus areas that this subcommittee takes on would align with the interagency work plan. And remember that that is very much a living document where as we get input from members, whether subcommittee members or from the full EAC, we are constantly working on that document to identify those big ticket items where our agencies have identified the need for advisory support. So there would be ideally some alignment between the subcommittee efforts and what is captured in that work plan. And then ultimately, we, in a perfect world, we want to make sure that you all have an interest and capacity to actually serve on this subcommittee. So that's part of the criteria as well. And then we also want to make sure that interagency staff have adequate capacity to support the subcommittee activities. The biggest part of this is really at a minimum, making sure that we can provide the administrative support that's necessary since these are publicly noticed meetings. And that means 10 days notice has to be given to the public, meeting materials and the agenda need to be posted. And then we've been hosting on Zoom and providing ASL and Spanish interpretation. So all of those administrative aspects require staff to support these meetings in order for you all to host a subcommittee. And then finally, any of the recommendations put forward by this subcommittee just need to be allowable within the committee charter. So keeping that in mind, and I'll mention one last time that the committee charter can always be amended. So that's something to consider if you are running into an obstacle or a barrier in your work and you think that an amendment needs to be made to the charter, that can be brought forward to the full committee. I'm going to pause there. Any questions around criteria, process, anything like that? Okay, cool. Okay, so that takes us on to what the subcommittee will actually work on. I want to start by saying that back in April, when this subcommittee was established, there were a lot of ideas that were discussed initially for potential focus areas of this subcommittee. And we want to hear from you all today about what those priorities are. As a starting place, what I'm showing on the screen is the list of work plan opportunities. These again are the opportunities that were brought forward at the May executive meeting by our agencies saying, hey, this is really where we need advisory support from the EAC. And I'll briefly read through this, and then basically I'm welcome any thoughts or feedback on these in particular, but then we want to have a discussion with you all about what you have in mind, what you want to accomplish by serving on this subcommittee.
Can I speak? This is Martha, Miss Kelly. I see where we're talking about the 2024 work plan, but nowhere on this plan is any about concerns about the safety issues that we had brought up during their meetings, as well as climate issues. And that's really what we're talking about today. I know that there is an agenda that we need to meet for our given CTC and other partners that are involved, but we also need to address the ideas of safety and climate, and that is not even represented in this work plan. So I'm concerned as to what happened to the other items that were brought up that even brought together this committee.
Yeah, I'm glad you flagged that, Martha. So just to be really clear, so these are the work, this is what's captured in the work plan, which has been under development for the past year or so. And this is separate from what this subcommittee can put forward as their scope of work. So we're including this as a reference point since the subcommittees are one of the mechanisms that we can use to accomplish some of this work that the agencies have identified a need for and want to partner with the EAC on. But in addition to these items, that's where we want your input to say, what can the subcommittee set out to do? What issue areas do we want to focus on? And then can we find a way to align those efforts with ongoing work at the agencies? Like, who do we need to connect you with? Do we need to bring in someone from Caltrans, CTC, CALSA, things like that at a full committee meeting or a subcommittee meeting? You know, what does that work outside of the full committee meetings look like? So this is the space to do that. William, I see your hand, so go ahead.
Oh, I just want to add something quickly to Carolyn. So there are also a lot of things coming down our pipelines, kind of that will come into the purview of the committee that are not officially on our interagency work plan, but there's a lot of projects. And as we get a better sense of the scope of this committee, we can kind of, as Carolyn was saying, like direct those things into here. And we will do our due diligence next time to have the list of the priorities so that we can kind of merge those things together a bit better visually.
Then I would like to clarify that this is, like you said, this is more along the scope of work that you've had then you said it's been ongoing, and you're hoping to resolve some of these needs through this particular ad hoc committee. Is that correct? Am I hearing that correctly?
Yeah, and not for everything. We don't imagine that all these work plan opportunities will come to the subcommittee. For example, like the local transportation climate adaptation program. That's kind of a natural fit for safety and climate, as it's a program that addresses climate change and infrastructure needs for changing climate. So that would be somewhere where we'd say, hey, those are great merge points, but maybe less, like the anti-displacement memo would probably be more appropriate for housing and infrastructure and broadband. So this is the list for everything and everyone, and maybe full committee, maybe subcommittees, but we're parsing it out kind of as we go. It's iterative, and we're working on it with you.
That's understood, and that's understandable. Again, though, I would like to see the list of the outcomes that we had during our meeting. And I think that a good starting point is actually asking ourselves amongst ourselves, what are some of those goals or things that I want to identify in this space for that target need, right? What are the identifying markers that would make or justify that given module for our attention or our input? So I think that would be a good place to start.
Yeah, and Martha, thank you, because that's exactly what this space is for today. And I just want to remind everybody that as this is the first meeting of this subcommittee, the kickoff, we're kind of making sure we know who's in the room and what we're interested in working on, and we can continue this conversation. What's decided today is not going to be the final end-all be-all. New things can always be brought to the subcommittee. Subcommittee members themselves can always raise additional ideas or priorities for the subcommittee to consider for, you know, their work. And again, like that can change over the course of the year. That could change between today and the next time the subcommittee meets. So this is an initial discussion, kind of getting some of those priorities, like you're saying, Martha, hearing from folks like, what's top of mind? When you said, I want to sign up for the subcommittee, you probably had something in mind for what would be accomplished through this work. So that's what I want to open the floor for.
I believe Michelle has
Go
some
ahead.
comments.
Okay, William, I see your hand. So why don't you go first? You've been waiting, and then.
I just want to echo what Martha was saying, and I think that it's very clear that the work plan opportunities are not exclusively the only thing that we'll all be working on as committee members, but it just would have been nice to see the stuff that we've already said over the year and a half that we've been bringing ideas to be shared at this first kickoff meeting. And considering it took 3 months to get to this point from when we created the committees, I think it's just an important note to flag, because I think the capacity is really important. And being that there isn't anyone that does equity advisory committee work 100% of the time, there isn't someone that's 100% of the time thinking about the things that we've said over the past year and a half. And it's asking a lot that you all in your day-to-day work have to also carry what we'd like to see on the screen right now, because we don't have a full-time job doing this, so that we don't come to this meeting with all of the points that we've made in the past. That's it.
And William, just to clarify, are you referring to, so a lot of this conversation when these subcommittees were adopted at the April meeting, there was some initial discussion and brainstorm around the different focus areas of these subcommittees and what they could potentially accomplish. And so just making sure that we have that documented in addition to the work plan, and then ideally, you know, planning ahead for the next meeting as we continue this conversation. We will then also have the notes from this meeting as well. So just having all of that information on hand so folks can review it.
No, I'm also just saying that over the past year and a half, we've brought forth ideas about the equity index at the meeting that we had in Stockton to talk about the equity index. We had meetings about the CalSTA strategic plan. I know that that's an ad hoc committee, so that's a separate issue. But we've talked about these work plan issues. The last meeting at the CTC, we talked about the different funding areas and how equity was being added to all of them. There's feedback that we've provided in several spaces on these work plan opportunities, and I'm saying that in addition to you all gathering the information that you need to do your day-to-day work and your roles for the three agencies, we just like to see our ideas reflected as well. And just as these opportunities are potential opportunities, we've brought forth ideas that we wanted to discuss at these committees. That's I think what Martha was alluding to. Correct me if I'm wrong. And it would have been nice to have that information brought forth. And so now, as we have this discussion again, we're now pulling from our memory, because we've done this twice. I was at both the meetings yesterday. We're now pulling from our memory as if we haven't talked about this stuff the past 18 months, but we have. That's all I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So I wanted, maybe as like a good just reminder for folks. So all of the discussion notes of what we've talked about, you know, in response to these work plan opportunities, but also as we've come up with these concepts of the different subcommittees and what the priorities are of the EAC members, all of those discussions are captured in our meeting minutes and the book items and all of the subcommittee updates and the book items that are coming out for this August 22nd meeting. So we have tried our best to capture and document all of that. We did not want to bring just a stack of information to you all for this discussion, because this is intended to be the time where you all can speak amongst yourselves and think through in a more nimble fashion, like, what else do we want to talk about? What do we want to get done in the subcommittee? Like, what has not risen to the surface quite yet that we want to make sure is captured here? So I just want to stress the point that the information that you all have shared with us previously is documented, it's captured, it's posted online, it's in all of our meeting materials, and we have that as staff. We've shared that with you all as committee members, but we want this space to be a time where you all, now that you're formally on this subcommittee, can just talk. You can brainstorm, you can run ideas past each other, and so that's what we're here for.
I also
Okay.
want to note in the chat, Michelle wrote, I think there are some major issues around climate change and transit as a whole, and addressing those concerns would be good. So safety and climate issues, as Martha was noting, that have been discussed before, transit and climate change. Those have been uplifted today.
Perfect. Thank you, Sequoia. Yeah, I couldn't see the chat. Okay.
Well, I just, like, in general, I would like to say that climate change has created a great impact on how we travel to and from and on these corridors. It affects the movement of goods. It affects our work, you know, economic development. And in that context, understanding the safety, because when we typically would have a certain weather condition, we're subject to many different type of weather conditions at any given time. So, for example, right now we look at drought as something that is indicative of the summer, but now we look at the summer not only with the drought, but it could be flash floods, it could be a thunderstorm, it could be fires, it could be a lot of different things that could happen all at once. So understanding that the conditions have changed, and understanding that as we have people working in these conditions, it's an issue. People traveling in these conditions, people having some certain expectation of safety in these corridors is an expectation, and being able to mobilize in these spaces is another condition. So there's just many different factors that come into thought. But for myself, right now, being out here on the foothills, I'm looking at how people are coming in and out of some of these spaces, and there aren't very many outlets for other cars to even get off the road. There's only certain entry spaces and exits. So just looking at that and understanding the concern that if there's nowhere else to go and there aren't any road spaces for exiting or for mitigating a disaster, I could see that we really have to start looking at how to make sure that those corridors are safe for others.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Martha. Michelle, do you want to chime in?
Yeah, I would like to. I know I'm not part of the committee, but that can change too. But I put in the chat, I think some of the language and where we can, in this committee at least, I think in the others in a different way, since our focus is on climate and things like that, I think we can bring that language into some of what we work on as a committee. It's so important that we look at climate and how that affects people, because transit brings pollution and other things. And so how green we become as a state is dependent on how we infrastructure as a whole, and transit has a big role to play in that. And I think this committee can look at that and bring that language to the table. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. Also, just as, and I'm going to stop sharing screen so that we can just have a conversation. But before I do so, I want to give a couple examples of things in here that tie to this committee a little more directly, which aren't elaborated. But so, for example, some of you, I think, were involved in those early conversations with the Caltrans Equity Index. And we're at a place now where we're looking for advisory support on the development of use cases. One of those use cases, or in other words, like one of the ways that we want to apply the use of that tool, is around our safety programs. And so on the Caltrans side, that would be a really good example of something that's in the work plan, but very specific to the subject matter expertise and interest of the subcommittee, so we could bring it forward to you all to work on, if you're interested in that. So a lot of these things can be parsed out, and I think some of the ideas that have been raised so far by Martha and William and Michelle, these ideas align with probably some of these big ticket items. So if you're looking to get, make some progress on those issue areas, we can see where we can plug those in, right? What are our agencies working on that touch those points, and can we get some advisory support on that? So
I'm grateful for that, because that'll be I'm very grateful for that, because that'll be an easier lift if that's already in motion, like what you're talking about, the safety idea. And I'm open to moving to things that we already have on the work plan. I just want to make sure that we establish some type of language or some type of criteria to base our decisions. Like, for example, when they're conducting a road space or even a project, that these are the criteria that they should consider and not dismiss, right? Do they have a plan for climate, to mitigate any variables that might come out or about through climate? Do they have a safety plan or a backup plan? That's a concern for me. When we're looking at the 99 corridor and we had the incident where we had all that water and those atmospheric rivers, we contracted out with a company that didn't have a backup plan. They just kind of thought it was going to be business as usual. So we really need to structure our framework, and when we do our RFPs, to request that these contractors have something that they can bring forth to make sure that we are covered and there's lessened liability, not only for the state, but for the residents of California, that we're looking at how to structure the plan so that when you do your checklist, it's not just, hey, we got the project ready, it's funded and it's ready to go, but really looking at, have we thought about what could happen? Have we checked all of our, crossed all our T's and dotted all our I's that are not on the page, right? That are variables that could come because of climate change. I think that is something that, we need to kind of have some type of a construct or a plan to be able to reference back and forth to and from. And that way, when we do look at that index that you're looking at, we can actually say, we have this criteria and we were able to satisfy that. And yes, we are meeting that because we've set up these goals and deliverables, and they are in conjunction or in alignment with what we would like to see in those spaces.
Yeah, thank you, Martha. And what I'm hearing, kind of tracks with one of yesterday's conversations around the subcommittees. Peggy had mentioned something around wanting to make sure that there's an opportunity for EAC members to weigh in on some of the language that is consistently used when we, talk about policies and processes. And, that was a very specific comment around, including and like elevating inclusive language and identifying people with disabilities. And so what I'm hearing from you, Martha, is that if we see, this language as being a cornerstone of how policies and processes are implemented, that if we want to make sure as a committee, we have put forward language around like safety and climate change, and like as those like values are represented, that less things will, I guess, slip through the cracks, right? So if there's some consistency around that you all want to put forward, we could look at whether it's program guidelines language or other policies or practices, or whether it's the EQI information, that information is included in there.
Yes, exactly. Because even just the idea of having health included, right, in this, what we call safety, health is important as well. And it's a conduit of this catalyst we're calling safety, right? It's part of how it is dispersed into the community. If we have good healthy conditions, and we have those considerations for those healthy outcomes, then we could report back that we looked at our model for safety and climate, and looking at the project, these things were evaluated, and we could report back and say, yes, indeed, these were some of the conditions that were evaluated, and we met those expectations as best we could for said project, or as best we could for given the circumstances, or whatever it is, those parameters that we're in. And if we went above that criteria, what it is that those parameters are, then we could report back on that and say that was a win. Or if we fell short from, how can we look at evaluating it so that the next time we do this, something that we can make sure that those considerations are applied. So I think that it's really just setting up the language, setting up some construct as to what we want to have included in this space, and then being able to take on that project and be able to kind of say, okay, this satisfies this and it doesn't, or we need to include this. What's missing?
Definitely. Other thoughts from the group in terms of topic areas or issues that this subcommittee wants to take on?
Just a real quick comment, just because it's been in the news a lot, and I think that all of these issues are kind of having an impact, and it's certainly going to have, I think, an equity lens on it, and that is with all of the climate change impacts that are happening, and we're now seeing home insurance, renters insurance, all of those becoming just almost unattainable for families and folks living in California. So I think that we want to look at some of the real life, kind of like what Martha was saying, some of the real life impacts that these climate change situations are having on people. And so I would just like on the whiteboard somewhere that we're taking a look at what is being done in the legislative space, the regulatory space with regard to addressing unaffordability or unavailability of insurance as a result of climate change.
Thank you, Cheryl. William, go ahead.
I'll just add it's kind of in the line of what Member Vegas Walker just stated, but in regard to equity, the communities that have the highest climate adaptation, like communities that suffer most from factors of climate like heat islands and flash floods, communities that suffer the most from pedestrian deaths, from vehicular accidents, from pollution, from transportation infrastructure, they tend to be the communities that are most underrepresented in our communities, whether they're Black or Latino or Southeast Asian, Native American, and often folks who have disabilities of all backgrounds tend to be in these communities. I just hope that the agenda for this committee keeps that in mind. I worked on the active transportation plan for San Francisco. It's called the Active Communities Plan. And even just this week, the mayor of San Francisco said that she was opposed to a bike lane that was proposed in Chinatown. And it seems that that bike lane was proposed without the backing of the folks who live in that community. And so just making sure that when we are looking at issues around climate and safety, that we're doing our best to incorporate the communities that will receive the benefits from these programs, and making sure that the folks who are in those communities can also continue to live in those communities, because often you'll see upgrades to facilities or improvements to communities, and it ends up pricing out the very folks that those improvements were created to help. So.
Absolutely. Thanks, William. Other thoughts from the group, and I'll just do a quick time check. We have about 13 minutes left. So we'll spend a few more minutes on this discussion, and then just keep in mind that this discussion can continue at the next meeting as well. Martha, go ahead. I see your hand.
You know, and coming back with what Chair Walker was saying, I think that that's important, is like, even if we're working on other things, I think that it's really important to be able to report back to the EAC and all our subcommittees that we connected some of our work to actual communities and have created some type of connection in those areas of specification, whether it's you know, bike lanes. Just this last week, thank you, Chair Walker, also for reminding me, my friend Mireya, her son was killed in a corridor that was connecting from a highway to a thoroughfare, right? And that is like a thing that was in-house, more of the city, but we also can do our part on the highway to make sure we create a buffer to slow down vehicles before they enter into communities and maintain that velocity throughout, you know, those spaces. And those are things that we can do, and we can actually go to communities that are actually needing some type of mitigation and show how the work actually works. You know, how something so simple as changing or putting a rotunda or talking to community folks about what are some of the things that they can do to facilitate those changes, because oftentimes we'd like to have a stop sign or we'd like to have a roundabout, right? But their monies aren't there. So we need to be on the chapter of educating as well, and letting our community know what our limitations are, where we're at with all of this. What do we do to make this better? But also, what can you do to make sure that we have a better relationship with our communities so that we can do our part to make things better within our own jurisdictions? Because it's not all on the state. Sometimes there's a line that stops, and then a lot of our folks don't understand that, and they look sometimes to the bigger institution to be able to give those answers. And I think that as a state organization, we can give information and education so that we can promote that safety. Even just a slowing down campaign would be something that would mitigate and show our conscious effort of we recognize that those things are happening in those transitional spaces.
Definitely. Thanks, Martha. And Sequoia, go ahead.
Just kind of based on this conversation, I'm really appreciating everything that's being discussed and being brought forth, and, you know, acknowledging that while some of these things are outside of the scope of the EAC, the fact is that safety, climate change, health, they're interdisciplinary, right? They're intersectional. We don't just focus on transportation in any of these and pretend like the other pieces don't exist. So kind of while this conversation is happening, I'm thinking about how we can link even just informational presentations from like Cal OES, the Office of Emergency Services, who works on a statewide emergency plan, but they have a transportation section that our committee or subcommittee would be probably very interested to just even learn about. So we may not be able to offer like an advisory capacity on that, but having the information I think is really useful so that we can have a more informed discussion about what's going on. And I think those are elements that could be like a very welcome. I think they would be really happy to come and kind of share the information out and share what they're learning and learn from us too, because they're also limited in who they're able to talk to, and there's always useful times for information sharing. So yeah, just wanted to share that. And I yield to you, Michelle.
Thanks for adding that, Sequoia. Go ahead, Michelle.
A good point about bringing information from other groups into the group for safety and and the environment. There is a plan currently being worked on with the independent living centers throughout the state on safety and emergency preparedness and things like this. And so it might not be a bad idea to kind of coordinate maybe getting information on that, because if you provide for disabled people, you're also providing for other people with other independently needs throughout the state, not just them. So thanks.
Great point. Thanks for sharing that. So we are getting close to time. So this has been a really great kickoff discussion, but I want to move us to a couple of our action items really quick before we wrap. And then just keep in mind that, you know, as the wheels keep turning after today's call, take down some of those ideas, and you can either send them to us directly as staff, or you can bring them to the next subcommittee meeting. So with that, Sequoia, I'll turn it back to you to do tab 5 on the agenda.
Awesome, thanks. Okay, so tab 5 is our discussion of our meeting schedule. So this is an action item on the agenda. However, it's not required that we take action, but if it's decided today that it's a good time, we can do that. So just for quick reference, after the August 22nd meeting of our full Equity Advisory Committee, there will be one more EAC only meeting on Thursday, October 24th. And then our final executive meeting of 2024 on December 4th. So our question to you as a subcommittee is kind of the frequency that you would like to meet before December. Would we like to meet at least one time between each meeting, or monthly? Yeah, what works for folks in terms of a cadence? And also we can follow up with a doodle poll to kind of frame it in, but we wanted to see here at least like how often folks would like to meet.
Something back in December, something that we've actually done.
Sorry, Martha, your audio is very choppy, so it's we cannot get what you said.
I said monthly, and I'm hoping that we can report back something in December as an actual outcome or report of what we've resolved and kind of in what direction. So the new year will bring on.
So monthly with the goal of an accomplishment by December to report out on.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and Michelle has added in the chat that monthly would be monthly their preference as well.
And then are there any days and times that work best for folks? Again, we could do an email poll if preferred. Okay, we'll follow up and see what works for folks, and then but plan on having a monthly hour-long subcommittee meeting, and we'll report out kind of outcomes and any recommendations at subsequent EAC meetings, Equity Advisory Committee meetings. Great, thanks. Justin, is there any comment on this item from the public?
Thank you, Sequoia. I don't see any requests to comment at this time. Thank you.
All right, thanks. I'll pass it back to Carolyn.
Great. Okay, as we wrap up, the last action item here is the possible election of an ad hoc subcommittee chair. So with the creation of this subcommittee, there is also an opportunity for any of you all to take on a leadership role. And just for a little bit of information before you make a decision on this, the subcommittee chair is essentially responsible for reporting out at each of the full EAC meetings on the activities of this subcommittee, and also introducing any recommendations or actions that the subcommittee would like the full EAC to consider. And then the chair would also be responsible for facilitating these meetings and working closely with staff on the agenda development and any other materials that need to be put forward. So At this first meeting, we would like to provide folks with an opportunity to either nominate yourself to be chair or nominate one of your colleagues. And if you are not in a position to take action today, this action can always be done at a future meeting, but we do have a few minutes left if anybody wants to put their name forward or nominate someone else. So the floor is open. And I know some of you have already taken on other leadership roles for other subcommittees and the full EAC. So if we're not in a position today, and I know we're also missing a couple subcommittee members, we can always punt this to the next subcommittee meeting if folks aren't prepared to make this decision. Okay, I'm seeing some head nods. So yeah.
If you don't mind, I wanted to say though that in terms of reporting out that what we've discussed at this subcommittee meeting, would anyone like to volunteer to do that just for the next meeting?
Right, thank you, Sequoia. For the August 22nd meeting, since there will be a subcommittee report out, if one of you would be able to share, that would be fantastic. And we can make sure as staff, we've been taking notes so we can share that with the person who volunteers for this, so that you have that information to craft what your update is for this subcommittee.
Maybe Chair Walker could include that in his overall report, just for expediency.
Yeah, happy to do it.
And because he's so eloquent.
Okay, that would be
the
great.
Public meeting, I won't make my comment, but I appreciate that.
Okay, so for the August 22nd meeting, I have down that Chair Walker will do the report out for this subcommittee specifically, and then at the next meeting, we can revisit this topic of appointing a chair.
Sounds
okay, Clerk Hall, are there?
Sorry, Carolyn. Martha just texted me that she got knocked off, but she is interested in being chair.
Oh, okay. Shows that she's still on. She's not able to rejoin.
I think, yeah, I think something's, oh, she's putting in the chat, interested.
So moved.
Okay.
Second.
Okay.
Fantastic. So, yeah, so the motion.
Oh, don't think us yet. We got to vote.
Roll call. We got a roll call. Also,
yeah.
I'm sorry, William, as the chair, you are ex officio. So we got to do a roll call.
I won't move it. That means my cousin moved it.
Okay, so the motion on the floor is to elect Martha Armis Kelly as the chair of this subcommittee, and we have a second of that motion by Cheryl Villegas Walker. Clerk Hall, could I ask you to take a roll call vote?
Double checking. So the motion was made by William Walker, and then the second was by.
The motion was made by Martha Armis Kelly as she self-nominated to be chair.
Okay.
Just a point of clarification: if I'm not supposed to vote at these, you're gonna have to look at the other two meetings because I voted. So just a heads up. Well, I won't vote now since I've been told not to.
Chair Walker, at least in previous meetings that I've been chairing and I'm not the subcommittee chair, you should be able to vote like any other member, even though you're an ex officio member as chair of the full committee. But I might be wrong on that. Okay.
Yeah, for these ones in the charter, we have the chair of the committee is an ex officio non-voting member of any of the subcommittees. Yeah, it's just different.
Okay, well, with that, we can always amend the notes from yesterday's subcommittee meetings. And then again, amendments to the charter can also always be made down the road. So if we want to revisit that, we can. That being said, Clerk Hall, I'll turn it over to you to do a roll call vote.
Okay. Ana Gonzalez. Martha Armis Kelly.
She put I in chat. her audio is not good. She texted me.
Okay. Amber Novi. Cheryl Villegas Walker.
Yes.
And so not calling on William Walker for a vote, we wouldn't meet the threshold of 3 votes needed.
Okay, so we need more folks on the committee to
We
pass.
just need more folks present.
Yeah,
Okay.
folks present. So
Sorry, I asked to switch into this committee, for future meetings and out of the housing, just so you can Walker knows. But anyway, okay.
Justin, can we add Michelle to the roster just like right now? So she can vote. Is that okay? Or would that be for next time?
But no, I mean, well, we did that yesterday, so I think we'll go ahead and do that today.
Okay.
and we'll just sort it out later. So I will be adding Michelle Rousey as a member of this subcommittee. We'll continue.
It all comes back as recommendations from the committee to the full EAC anyway, right? So
Yeah. So
no. As the next agenda is developed, all of anything that came as a motion in these committees will be listed as an action item for approval as a part of the committee report. So anything you didn't have quorum on, anything you didn't have quorum on, you can vote on as a full committee at the meeting on the 22nd.
So if we have 3 out of 5 members voting today, that's enough to pass this, right, Justin?
Yes.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, Michelle.
Thanks, Michelle.
Wonderful. Okay, thank you, Michelle, and thank you, Clerk Hall. So Martha Armis Kelly has been elected as subcommittee chair with those votes. And with that, we will coordinate with Martha to make sure that she has the notes from this meeting to report out at the August 22nd meeting on behalf of this subcommittee. Clerk Hall, is there any public comment on this item?
Thank you, Carolyn. I have not seen any requests to comment at this time. Thank you.
Wonderful. Okay, so with that, are there any other comments or questions from this group before we adjourn? Okay, hearing and seeing none, we'll adjourn this meeting at 3:05 p.m. We appreciate all of your time today. Thank you, folks.
Thank you.
Here.